Welcome to Building the Future of Work Together, the podcast where we explore how we can build the future of work with neurodiversity in mind. Have you heard that 50% of Gen Z identify as neurodivergent, but 50% of organizations wouldn't consider employing neurodivergent candidates? Yeah, we didn't like that last statistic either, and we want to make a change. So, join Lucy Smith as she interviews inspiring guests who share their unique insights and experiences. We're going to be busting some myths and starting conversations so that we can help build a more inclusive and innovative future of work.
Hi there, it's Lucy here from Inclusive Change. I'm here talking about building the future of work together. A whole series of podcasts, videos, content, whatever we want to call it, talking about building the future of work. Mostly we focus on neurodiversity. And today I've got guests with me who I work with very closely, actually. So Dan Biddle, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Let's get started. Let's get into this, okay? In the future of work a lot between us. We talk about what that might mean, and it's a big topic. But before we go too deep, can I ask you to tell us a bit about you and your organization and what's your passion?
So I am the chief executive of a company called the National Diversity Employment and Advisory Service. And we specialize in making the recruitment process more inclusive and more accessible for people that are probably the furthest from the labour market purely because of they have a disability, they may have a neurodiverse condition, and the way that they're kind of viewed, it's not done in a way that is welcoming for them to try and seek employment, and there's a lot of stigma still attached. So I started the business as a result of my own lived experience. So my background is in the construction industry. Unfortunately, I was caught up in the 7/7 terrorist attacks in London back in 2005. So I went from being able-bodied, fit young man to then acquiring quite a severe physical disability, a mental health condition, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And then something that I didn't know until actually talking with yourself and meeting you was that I got a trauma-induced neurodiverse condition of obsessive compulsive disorder. So when I put all of these in the mix and then started applying for work, when I was applying for work and I was actually disclosing my disability, I wasn't getting anywhere with it. And this went on for a number of years. And I thought, well, there's two ways I can do this. I can moan about it, or I can try and do something positive, use that lived experience, use my knowledge and expertise, and then try and build a company off the back of it, which is basically how NDAS, which is the abbreviated version, come about.
Uh, where do I go with that introduction? I mean, there's not many people that I speak to, and we know each other well because Dan, let's be open and transparent about this. We're co-directors with Inclusive Change at Work, a community interest company, which talks about what we're saying, building the future of work, supporting young people who are neurodivergent, supporting anybody who is neurodivergent and disabled into the workplace. But years ago and your story. So a lot of people will be interested in what happened in 7/7. Are you happy to talk about that? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So basically, as I say, my former career was in the construction industry. And at the time, I was running a project for the NHS in Wembley. So again, back in 2005, Wembley Stadium had been demolished and was being rebuilt. So my site office from where I was actually overlooked the building site, which was going to be the new Wembley. And I'd been on that site for about 3 or 4 weeks and everything was going fine. When it comes to the morning of the 7th of July, if people remember, the 6th of July was quite a big day because it won the bid to host the Olympic and Paralympic Games for 2012 in London. So kind of 6th of July 2005, there was a real euphoria in London around what was coming. For me, I wanted to be part of that construction program that was going to be building these Olympic venues. I'm from the East End of London, so to be part of that really did mean something to me. So my day basically just went a little bit awry. And then when I was leaving work and went home, I never bought my travel card for the following day. So now we roll around to the morning of the 7th. I woke up at my normal time, about 5:15. I didn't feel very well. I went back to sleep, woke up about an hour later. So by the time I'm up, showered and dressed and leaving the house, I'm about an hour and a half later than I would normally be. So there's these whole sliding door moments that if I do one thing differently, my life goes in a totally different direction. So when I got the bus into Romford, there was a burst water main which delayed me. I thought about getting off the bus and getting in my car, but I stayed on the bus. Got to Romford station eventually, realised I didn't have my travel card, so I had to queue up. Got on what I deemed to be a quicker train, the fast train to Stratford. And anybody that uses public transport, there was signal failure at Stratford, which is not uncommon. So again, I constantly get delayed. Eventually get to Liverpool Street Station. Normal routine would have been to buy a sandwich and a drink and kind of crack on with my day, but I didn't. I run through the concourse, through the barrier machine, down the steps onto the Circle Line platform, and there was actually a train there, but it was heaving as London Underground always is. And I thought, well, the next one's only going to be a couple of minutes away. I'm late anyway, so 2 or 3 minutes ain't going to make that much difference. I'll get the next one. So I jumped on the next train. I was a big guy. I was 6'4", 19 and a half stone, very active, fit sportsman. So I never used to sit down. I always used to stand up on the train. And my brilliant idea was to type a text message into my phone. Then when I needed to change trains at Baker Street, I'd run outside, send a message, run back in. Unfortunately, showing my age, going back to 2005, I had a Nokia 3310. I got quite big hands. I was a goalkeeper, so I got quite big hands. So now you have to picture somebody that's 6'4", 19 and a half stone, hands like shovels, trying to type a text message. It wasn't going well. Next time I looked up, the Baker Street sign was moving. I realised I'd missed my stop. Looked at where I could get off the train to get to the connecting train to Wembley, and that was going to be Paddington. Literally, we pulled out of Edgware Road Station about 20, 30 seconds into the tunnel. I happened to look down to the left of me where there was a guy sitting there holding a rucksack. He looked at me, I looked at him. He leant forward, sat back, stared at me again, put his hand in the bag, and there was just a big white flash, and the force of the explosion actually blew me out of the train. I hit the tunnel wall and then landed in the crawl space between the tunnel wall and the track. I was fully conscious, so I've got complete recollection of everything that happened. And as a result of that day, I lost both my legs. So I'm a bilateral double amputee. I'm a permanent wheelchair user because prosthetic legs don't work for me with the level of amputation I've got. I lost an eye, my spleen burst, I was set on fire, and the list goes on and on. I was in intensive care in a coma for 8 weeks. I was in the intensive care unit in a total for 12 weeks, and I was in hospital for a year. I died 3 times on the day of the attack and had to have open heart surgery to restart my heart. And I had the second largest blood transfusion that St Mary's Hospital in London had ever given. So I had 87 pints of blood put in me, and I think their record was 104. So
Wow.
I was the second biggest blood transfusion of the hospital.
Whoosh. That's a heck of a story. And bearing in mind you and I know each other and I've heard that story, those people that might be listening or watching, that's a heck of a story. It's hard to say anything else at this moment to be able to take that forward. Yeah.
I think it's one of those experiences that luckily not many people go through. I'm the worst injured survivor from all 4 attacks that day. I'm an incredibly lucky man to be alive, but it is a double-edged sword, and I paid one hell of a price for my survival. But even on my darkest days, I'm so thankful that I did survive, because it gave me a different outlook on life. It made me appreciate what I used to take for granted, but it also showed me the social injustice around disability of all forms, and how excluded kind of really intelligent, talented individuals are because of a stigma and a fear that we have around disability. And that's my passion, is to change that, to put disability in a positive light, to not be ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of my disability in any way, shape or form. And I want to be able to showcase the capabilities that disabled people have, because I'm a firm believer in it is not a capability issue that we have as a disabled community. It's an opportunity issue. We don't have the same opportunities as our non-disabled counterparts do in employment, in education, in all walks of life. And that's my passion, is to try and change that. And again, meeting yourself and becoming a director of inclusive change at work, and the work that we do, it is all focused and driven about making that positive change.
Absolutely. And so let me just ask you then, when you when you were ready to enter back into the world of work, how how what happened? What kind of experiences did you have when you were taking those steps back into the world of work after becoming
Mhm.
disabled as an adult?
Uh, I was lucky in respect that the company that I used to work for, they kept a job open for me, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't something that I was interested in. It wasn't what I was trained and qualified to do. So it, to be brutally honest, it bored me. And I'm one of these people that with PTSD as well, if I'm bored, my brain goes to places I really don't want it to spend too much time in. So I decided that I would start looking for another job. And what I very quickly realized was that as a process, the recruitment process itself is really difficult for somebody that's physically disabled because there's information that I would need that would mean I wouldn't have to disclose my disability that no other section of society would need.
Mm,
And what we have with the Equality Act, which basically has an element to it, which says if you have a disability, you're not legally obligated to disclose it. That's great if you don't have a visibly obvious or a physical limiting disability. Because I've had situations where I've not disclosed my disability, I've applied for a job, my qualifications and experience gets me an interview. Happy days. I turn up and there's nowhere for me to park. There's steps to get into the building. So straight away, I have to make the phone call to say, I've come for an interview, I'm outside the building, I can't get in. And people go, well, just come up the steps and there lies the
here's the
issue.
problem.
Straight away, the reaction that I get when somebody comes to the top of the steps and looks down at me, and again, they're looking down at me, I know I'm going to hide into nothing. I know that person's looking at me going, that's a problem. That person's going to be a problem. They don't stand here and think, our building's not accessible. That's the problem.
Mm.
Because we talk about the social model of disability, but in recruitment, a lot of times it's the medical model that's adopted. Because how do we deal with the problem of the disabled person, not how do we deal with the barriers that our organization has, whether it's cultural or physical, there are barriers that are there.
So let's explore that a little bit. We mentioned medical model and social model of disability. Can you explain what they are?
Yeah, to put it in its simplest terms, the medical model is all about the what's wrong with the individual in terms of society says that individual needs to be fixed. So we need to fix that person so that they can form and fit into what everybody else in society is like. The social model is there to flip that on its head. And it come about in the mid 70s. And what the social model says is actually the disability is not the issue. It's the environments we find ourselves in. It's the built environment. It's the attitudes we get from individuals. It's the way that disability is perceived as if once you've got a disability, that's it. You're done. You're on the scrap heap. Well, actually, the reality is there are millions of talented, educated, experienced disabled people out there that they just need an opportunity to show that. And a staggering statistic is I think it's about 86% of disabled people in the UK acquire their disability during their working life. So businesses are having disabled people in their organisations, and that person may be too frightened to disclose they've got a disability, and they're struggling, and they could ultimately end up losing their job. And it's all because we don't create an inclusive culture in the workplace to be able to bring our whole selves to work. We have to. Obviously, I can't because I've got no legs, so mine's very obvious. But others have to kind of hide it under a bushel and say, "Well, I can't be me because they might not like that. I might not fit in."
And that's where, so we talk about neurodiversity a lot and inclusive change. Our mission is building the future of work with neurodiversity in mind. So that kind of leads me on to another question. Then it's neurodiversity is very much can be a hidden disability. It can be something that people will hide and not disclose in the workplace. What tips do you have for starting conversations about disability and neurodiversity then in the workplace?
I think it goes back to the culture of the organization. It goes back to when somebody's applying for a job. It's not about asking that person, do you have a disability? It's about asking, well, what can we, if you're successful, what can we do to support you? Is there any adaptations we need to make? What is it that we need to do? And I think we've reached a point where people are so frightened to ask the question that they think, well, if I just bury my head in the sand and ignore it, it'll just sort itself out. That'll be the end of it. So we've reached a point where people are frightened to engage, but engagement is the way we can derive the best solutions for individuals. And I think what organizations fail to kind of see is that, particularly with neurodiversity, it's a very person-centered condition that a person has. You could meet one autistic person. That means you've met one autistic person. The next 10 autistic people that you see, each one will be completely different
Yes.
in how they present, in how they are. I've met plenty of neurodiverse individuals who are incredibly proud of their neurodiversity. They're incredibly proud of what that gives them and the way they see the world, and the advantages that they have in the way they can focus on things and really drill down on information. I've met others who are so wanting to hide it and so like, well, no, I can't disclose that because that's going to go against me. So we've got a position where I believe there's knowledge out there. I just don't believe there's understanding, or as much understanding as we need. We can only get that understanding by having conversations. And that all starts with just engaging with your staff. If you're looking at somebody and it looks like they're struggling to do something, it looks like they're struggling to concentrate, or they're really fidgety, or whatever it may be, have a conversation. Is everything okay? Is there anything we can do to support you? It looks like you're struggling at the moment. What can we do to help? It doesn't need to be confrontational, but it needs to come from a place of support to enable that person to feel supportive and open up. Once you do that, it starts to change the culture of the organization for the better. We know that greater inclusivity in businesses creates greater productivity, greater loyalty. There's so many positives for businesses to be inclusive. It's just trying to shift that balance of burying our head in the sand, frightened to say the wrong thing, to just having engagement and treating people with respect.
I completely agree with you, and I've started to talk about neurodiversity in particular in terms of organizational development and the next level of understanding in how we can create high performing teams, how we can value and embrace creativity and innovation whilst thinking about, how do we meet the needs of everybody on our team? Because that's kind of what people are starting to expect nowadays. This is what people need.
I think what we need to do is not try and shoehorn people into conforming to what we believe and I hate the term, a normal person is.
Mm,
I'm 45 years old. In 45 years, I've not met one normal person, because everybody's definition of normal is different. It's
yeah.
personal to them. So instead of trying to shoehorn people into being something that they're not, or feeling a way that they don't feel, let them be them, and then watch that person thrive. Watch that person absolutely come to life. We know, and you know yourself, Lucy, that masking is a big issue that affects
Mm.
people in the workplace. It means they're not allowing themselves to be who they really are because they're frightened of how that's going to be perceived. So now that impacts on productivity, that impacts on the working relationships that people have. And it all comes down to creating an inclusive and safe working environment. And if we start to work on that basis and let people bring their whole selves to work, we start to see massive differences.
But what are the challenges with that though? What comes with that? Because I think line managers and supervisors, m- there are people don't have enough knowledge and perhaps struggle with some of the things that might happen in the workplace as a result of that.
Absolutely, and I think training your staff to understand neurodiversity, and I'm not talking about becoming a clinical psychologist and going down that route, but just a lived experience, just an understanding of, well, actually, autism has varying different degrees to how that can impact a person. So
Mm,
understanding what they are, understanding what to look out for. Again, the same with ADHD, the same with dyslexia and dyspraxia and dyscalculia. There are all these different issues that people are facing that organizations aren't really aware of. And for me, I think a lot of where organizations have their understanding of things such as autism comes from the media. I remember watching the film Rain Man when I was growing up, the Dustin Hoffman film, and
yeah.
he was autistic. All of
He,
a sudden,
yeah.
and that's my perception of autistic people, is that they're super intelligent, but really socially awkward. But it can be
I'm
further
gonna
from the
I'm,
truth.
I'm gonna throw in one of my favorite facts here in that myth busting. The character that Dustin Hoffman played was based on a person called Kim Peek. And Kim Peek wasn't autistic. He had FG syndrome. And so he was born with a chromosomal difference when he was born. And many people think that the character in Rain Man was a person, and it wasn't. It was based on somebody who had
Wow.
FG syndrome, which is, he was neurodivergent, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't autistic.
And again, I think for me that I didn't know that, and that film come
Mm.
out probably 30 years ago.
Yes.
So again, the understanding that we have is based on what we see, and if what we see isn't kind of portrayed in the right way, or the information isn't there, we build this bias about what we see and what we believe, and then that negatively impacts on how we perceive people and how we perceive the world that we're in. So
Yeah.
I really do think that it does come back to creating that understanding, and really kind of getting people in to deliver training, get talking to different groups that are specialists in inclusive recruitment, in providing training provisions, in providing reasonable adjustments, and knowing what support is out there to help you ensure that that person that joins your organization can thrive. Because when we interview somebody, we see potential, we think they're going to do a really good job. Problem
Mm.
is when they get into the workplace and it becomes all on top of them, and particularly the neurodiverse individuals, some will go very insular and they'll go into themselves and they start trying
Mm.
to mask. And basically, you get 80% of your energy masking and 20% of your energy going on work.
Oh,
That's not
absolutely.
sustainable.
No, no. So that brings me then to, what tips do you have for inclusive recruitment? So at NDAS, what tips do you have to employers out there?
So one of the first things that we do as a business, and we do it for a lot of our clients, is when they want to put, we've got a fully accessible and inclusive jobs board. So when a client wants to put a job on our jobs board, the first thing we do is we look at the job description, because a lot of the language that's used in job descriptions is generic cut and paste from other roles that the organization has. But also we look at what the tasks are, and we identify where certain parts of the disabled community would face barriers in achieving that task. So once we do that, we look at what adjustments can be made. We look at whether or not access to work, the government fund, could be utilized to overcome some of that. And we start to deconstruct the job description and then put it in a more inclusive format. With our jobs board, one of the things that I was talking about earlier about information that's needed, as for those of us that have a physical disability, there's information around the physicality of the environment we go into. So is there parking spaces? Is it level entry? Is there a lift? Is there a toilet? We get all that information from the client. Either we go and assess it or they tell us what they've got. So as a candidate, when you sign up, you tell me what your accessibility needs are. So then when you're doing your job search, the algorithm matches job description, location, and accessibility need. Therefore, we've removed the need to disclose you have a disability. Because if you know you can park, if you know you can get in, if you know you can toilet, you are going there just as any other candidate, not somebody who's disabled, who's going to be seen differently. And I think that's the really important thing. I think to really make recruitment inclusive, we have to examine what the process is, where it doesn't work, and how we fix it. The biggest problem is I talk to so many organizations that want to do things differently, but then they keep rehashing the same recruitment process they've done for the last 30 years, and they just expect it to magically give them a different result. If you want different outcomes, you have to do things differently, and that's what we provide. We provide that difference.
What kinds of things can they do practically? Bear with me. What kinds of things can people do practically? So, for instance, one of the things we do at Inclusive Change is that we provide the questions for interview beforehand.
Absolutely. So again, as a reasonable adjustment, providing the questions, allowing somebody to escort and support that individual to an interview if they've got as part of their neurodiversity, they may have severe anxiety and things like that. So allowing somebody to support, but also within that recruitment process, accepting things like video CVs is a brilliant way of enabling somebody to really put themselves across, because again, somebody that's dyslexic, they're going to struggle typing out a CV and a covering letter and things like that. So
Mm.
do a video CV. It's all about just adjusting the processes. And 9 times out of 10, these are zero cost elements. Allowing
We
it.
would,
Sorry, go on.
no, go on, carry on.
I say they're zero cost elements, because of sending a video CV in doesn't cost an organization any more than it does receiving an email. It's the same amount of time, 5 minutes to watch a quick video or 5 minutes to read a CV. So there's ways of doing things, but you just have to think a little bit differently about it.
Yeah, we were talking this morning in the office, and one of our team said, I really struggled to make an application for a job application, just going online and actually starting to fill out the form. Sometimes somebody who's ADHD will just not, because it's just too overwhelming to take all those steps.
Yeah, of simple things like if somebody is struggling to fill out an application form, allow them to do it over the phone if they're comfortable, to have a
Mm,
conversation with somebody. As I said before, I think it comes back to we historically do the same things over and over again when it comes to recruitment, whether it's one of your large recruitment agencies, whether it's in-house recruitment, the process doesn't really differ wherever you go. And I think that's the issue, that we've got into this regimented approach that we put out job descriptions, we get email CVs, we sit down, we do the sift, we get people in. That's great, but that doesn't work for everybody. And therefore, businesses are missing out on amazing talent because they're too rigid in their processes. They're not
mm.
open to adaptation. The flip side of that is they're frightened to do it as well because they don't know what they're legally obligated to do under the Equality Act. And they're frightened of getting it wrong. And it comes back to the fear of getting it wrong means they don't do anything. And that's worse because I don't very rarely have I come across any organization that has deliberately discriminated against an individual. It comes from a place of fear and a lack of understanding. So when I apply for jobs and I list my multiple disabilities, it frightens people. They sit there and panic and go, "Oh my God, how are we going to do? How are we going to deal with this guy?" So they just
Mm.
bump it. They don't understand the impact that has on the person who's got his 50th rejection, knowing
Yeah.
he's fully qualified and experienced to do that job. That's now soul destroyed and thinking, I just can't be bothered to do this anymore. So now we start creating mental health issues with individuals of depression because they can't get out of the rut they're in.
That leads me to a point, actually, and I've been noticing and hearing lots going on in the UK at the moment. We've got an election coming up, so there are lots of people saying different things. Current government talk about getting more people back into work and taking them from sick, or those people that are finding it difficult to get into work. I struggle with this a bit. I don't know if you feel the same, in that actually quite a lot of disabled people I know want to work, but the employers aren't quite ready and aren't able to open the doors to provide that kind of work, the kind of workplace that we need them to be.
Absolutely. I think from a government standpoint, that the issue is that they look at disability as a homogenous group. They think we're all the same. And I
Mm,
think what I've done or tried to do with my business is realize that when it comes to employment, there are three groups of individuals. There are those that will never be able to work because of their condition, their disability, whatever it may be, means that work will not be a feasible opportunity for them. And as a society, we should do all we can to support those individuals.
mm,
There's another group that, as you say, want to work, are perfectly capable of working, probably have previously worked, but they need a lot of support to get back into employment. They need a lot of
mm.
support to be guided through that process. So again, we should be providing that support and having those mechanisms in place. There's a third group, which I say I fall into, which is if somebody said to me, Dan, got a job for you, start Monday, bosh, I'd be there. Happy days. I'm work ready. But we don't see disabled people in those three groups. We just go, disabled people don't work. So we need to get you off
Yeah.
benefits and get you into employment. It's no good putting me on what used to be like a work choice program, teaching me to write a CV. I'm a degree educated man. I don't need help to write a CV. I need a job. So we don't treat it person centered, which is what we need to do, because disability is personal to every individual that has one. So what works for person A won't work for person B. So we need to be more person centered and derive strategies that are inclusive and take away the unnecessary barriers that are there.
My gosh. I mean, I hope that people listening will think differently after listening to you and hearing our conversation. Dan, how can people get in touch with you?
So in on my name on the screen, there's my website, which is www.ndeas.co.uk, or you can drop me an email at dbiddle@ndeasltd.com. I'm happy to speak with anybody and everyone that wants to get in touch, because I do truly believe that we're lacking equity in employment at the moment. We're lacking equity in how we treat people. People talk about equality as the panacea, and equality is a destination that we all want to get to. The vehicle and the mechanism that gets us there is equity. but we're fixated on this equality bandwagon, and we're missing out on the equity, and that's the part that we need to be tackling.
Dan, you're inspiring. Honestly, every time I speak to you, you know we work together anyway. But thank you, and I hope your words, I hope the things that we've talked about perhaps can make people think in a different way, and people want to get in touch with you. It's at www.ndeas.co.uk, and that stands for the National Disability Employment Advisory Service. Have I got it right?
Nope.
It's do it again. Do it for me, Dan. Tell me.
You always slip up on this one. It's the National
Yeah.
Diversity Employment and Advisory Service.
It's the diversity bit that I've got wrong, hasn't it? Oh my goodness. I do a whole, yeah, let me just stop right there. Okay, Dan, thank you so much for talking. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or say before we close?
No, I think the main thing is being disabled wasn't part of my life plan. That wasn't something that I'd planned for. I had any conscious understanding of what it was to be disabled. I got on a train to go to work the way I'd been doing for many weeks, and my life changed in a blink of an eye. The thing with discrimination, the one element that won't discriminate is disability. It doesn't care how rich you are, how poor you are, what your race is, what your sexual orientation is. It doesn't care, and nobody knows when it's going to hit. So my question is to anybody listening to this that is a manager or runs a business, if something happened to you or a really valued member of your staff, how easy would it be for them to return to work? Are you going to lose that talent and that investment in training and everything else because they've acquired a disability? Because it can happen to anyone at any moment. Believe me, I'm living proof of that.
It's really thought-provoking. Yeah, that question of if that happened to you, if that happened to a member of your team, would you be able to support? Massive. Thank you. Thanks,
My
Dan.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
You're very welcome. So I'm Lucy from Inclusive Change. We've been talking about building the future of work together, and keep listening. Check out some of our other episodes and see what we've got to say. Hey, thanks for listening to Building the Future of Work Together. We hope you feel inspired to embrace neurodiversity in your workplace, start conversations, and make change happen. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and join us next time as we continue to explore how we can build the future of work with neurodiversity in mind.